Hey guys, how's it going? Going to take a look at an issue of Comic Scene. This is Comic Scene number 20. And the reason I'm starting with this is the first Comic Scene that I ever purchased. I'm pretty sure. I went back through looking at eBay listings, and this is the earliest one that I remember. I bought it. This is, I believe, 1992. Just looking real quick at the indicia here to see. Pretty sure that's 1990. No, sorry, 1991. So this was summer 1991. So this was the year The Rocketeer came out in theaters. I wasn't a huge fan necessarily of The Rocketeer. I hadn't seen the comic or anything at this point, not in 91. I was interested in the X-Force and New Warriors. I was a pretty big mark for that stuff because both these books were out at the time, X-Force and New Warriors. And this was the summer that they had that, they had where the annuals had the story about, I can't remember what the name of the crossover was, but it was a kid who was like absorbing energy, and then he like exploded the energy, and it ran through X-Force and New Warriors and a couple other books. Anyway, so I was definitely into all this stuff, and seeing this magazine on the stands was pretty impressive, as you might imagine, for a kid who was just looking at comic books, and suddenly you see a magazine this size. It looks pretty good. I think the design holds up pretty solidly. So when you get inside and you take a look inside the front cover, you see ads in these vintage of Comic Scene from sort of 91. This is pre Wizard magazine, so right before Wizard starts publishing. And when Wizard starts publishing, as we go through other issues of Comic Scene, you'll see it sucks all the oxygen out of the room. There are no ads, only really house ads for other Starlog publications. It's very interesting. So these cards, these Marvel cards, were incredible at the time. I remember seeing them at a little card shop in a tiny little town that my grandparents lived in, and the card shop was the size of, I don't know, like a travel trailer. It was tiny, and it had opened basically because of the card boom. There were so many trading card sets at the time, but these Marvel cards were just some of the coolest things I had ever seen. I remember getting a couple packs of them and just being blown away, probably after having seen this ad. And of course, then, one of the many, many, many trading card sets to come out. I feel like the comic book trading card sets really probably when Warriors of Plasm came out, that was where the trading card sets were sort of played out. Nobody at that point was like, oh, good, more trading cards. So actually, I want to look at the back cover real quick. This is an ad for entertainment this month. Anyone who read comics in this time period knows basically this ad. This ad always looks sort of the same. And to prove the point, here's Comic Scene number 25, and there's the back ad. You can see they're very similar. They're always laid out the same, but you can see the dramatic shift. So this is August 10th, 1991, March 15th, 1992. And you can see where the big ads have changed over. This is Youngblood. This is right around the time when Youngblood was coming out. So it's before any of the rest of the Image stuff. But it really starts to knock down. And as we go forward, you'll see more and more Image stuff and less X-Men stuff, or Marvel stuff in general. But the other thing to notice here, you've got a huge X-Men ad up top. Then a lot of Marvel collectibles, Independence t-shirts. This is everything for DC Comics, which is really sort of astounding when you think about it. They're the number two. They were definitely the number two publisher at the time, but this is it. is kind of sprinkled in here. Deluxe bestsellers, you'll see Batman issues. You'll see, let's see, is there anything else? Arkham Asylum, which is essentially a Batman book. That's really everything in the deluxe bestsellers. Animal Man, issues 1 through 9. And then outside of Marvel, there's a Terminator book. There's Aliens, Earth Wars, so probably 2 Dark Horse books, I would imagine. And then everything else is Marvel. You have a little section here of Independence, which is really Dark Horse. So Concrete, Dark Horse Presents, Tank Girl. Again, this is really the Tick 5 through 10, the Turtles and Mirage issues. So a couple there, some collectibles, but for the most part, this is all Marvel. So it just kind of shows you where the market was and what the popular stuff was at the time. I was a huge Marvel mark. Like I had maybe one DC comic. I had an issue of Adventures of Superman that I got from a guy at Christmas time at school where we did Secret Santa, and he got my name, knew I was into comics, and just bought, I think, a random comic from the drugstore, and it was an Adventures of Superman. Where Superman, I think he shows up on the last page. They find out there's a homeless person who's working at the Daily Planet who's living in a stock room, and that is literally the entire issue. Why didn't I go for DC books? It's hard to say. And I also had an issue of the next to last issue of Green Lantern Corps when they were destroying the team, drawn by Gil Kane. It was a pretty sharp issue, but again, the energy, the mojo, the zeitgeist of the time was with Marvel Comics. So, digging into this issue, like I say, this is issue number 20. First one I would have pulled off the rack. So, on the comic scene, lettering, which was their letter column, Fabian Nicieza, is he overworked? He's going to talk about all the books that he's doing. They're trying to pump up Valiant with this Hero of the Atom. Impact was out at the time, so an article here about the Comet and about the Fly. Pushing Wonder Man, nobody cared, and the Viking Prince. And then a lot of stuff about the Rocketeer. The Rocketeer was like, I think, seen as the next big property. It was a Disney movie. It was based on a comic book. They were very open about the fact that it was based on a comic book. And so it really made you, I think there was the sense, yeah, this is going to be the one that sort of puts superhero movies over, puts comic books movies over with the general public. It did not work. It's not a bad movie. It's just not, it just wasn't there yet. So there's a couple different articles here talking about the Rocketeer stuff. Well, and we'll look at that as we go. But then an interesting article here about Reed Fleming, World's Toughest Milkman, which was an independent book. So we'll get into it. You'll see a lot of ads here for books like this, the Star Trek The Next Generation magazine. So this is a Starlog publication. Send cash check or money order payable to Starlog Press. This was super before the internet. And there are a lot of ads like this. So I think, I've not confirmed this, but I would imagine that if you picked up a Star Trek The Next Generation, on the second page in, there was probably an ad for Comic Scene. Or there was an ad for Fangoria or Gore Zone or Starlog, because those ads are in here as well. So taking a look here at the masthead, editors David McDonnell, got a couple managing editors. The senior contributing writers, I think, is interesting here. Patrick Daniel O'Neill, who later went on to work for Wizard. So this is before Wizard started. And Patrick Daniel O'Neill, evidently, from what I've read at least, took some of the contributing writers and some of the people who were writing in Comic Scene and went to Wizard when Wizard started up. So this is a nice little, talk about the word balloons. It's the editor talking about why the Rocketeer is popular. talking about serials. You know, The Rocketeer was very evocative of these old Republic serials like Commando Cody, you know, Radar Men from the Moon. I don't know how much that stuff is known now, both movie serials and these serials in particular. Early episodes of Mystery Science Theater had Commando Cody. That's probably where I first saw Commando Cody. So it was a weird, you know, 91 was about the time I was getting into MST. So it was a nice confluence of events where, you know, they're referencing things that I had actually heard of. Lettering, here we go. So this is their letter column. Interesting letter here from Karen Berger from DC Comics talking about the Neil Gaiman article from Comic Scene number 18. She's just sort of correcting the record here in terms of when Sandman was created and the provenance of how it came to be. There must have been, I don't remember this interview, but there must have been some sort of intimation that maybe there was some, I don't know, chicanery or something with the way that Sandman came about. I don't know that that's true, but she's really just correcting the record here, saying Sandman was not created before Black Orchid. There was no proposal submitted, you know, and it's not, she says here, upon its receipt, the proposal went through the normal company procedures, which is not, by the way, having a proposal sit on an editor's desk until the editor-in-chief asks to see it. So that must have been intimated in that article that that's what had happened. So, interesting. Again, they're talking about just general stuff. This is a nice kind of snapshot into fandom at the time. Because if you were into comics in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, it was not cool. It was not respected. It was not celebrated. If you were over the age of 10 and you were still reading comics, you were looked at as sort of eccentric at best. And so you can see, if you read through these letters, people are really kind of grasping at straws to legitimize comics in any way. They're talking about the Flash TV show, and they had John Wesley Shipp interviews Mark Hamill as the trickster. You know, and the Flash TV show was a good example. People were like, this is what's going to do it. This is going to help mainstream comic books. Of course, it didn't happen, but it's the first sort of rumblings that you get of that sort of thing. And people, again, like Dick Tracy, the Rocketeer, references to Batman here. People just looking for any sort of touchstone that they can find to say, no, comics are a legitimate art form. It's okay to like them. You know, they're moving into the popular culture. It's amazing to think of now, which, you know, comics basically are the popular culture. It was not that case at the time. These ads are really interesting to me. You'll see some of them in these early comic scenes. So Dickens' Video by Mail with The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle. You can, I don't know how much you can see on camera there, but it's barely legible, these pictures. Like, what are you even looking at? But, you know, $12.99 each. And this is Buena Vista Home Video. So, yeah, they're just, you know, they're direct marketing to fans. And there are a couple, I saw another one I'm not sure if it's in this issue or not, but there's an ad for Robotech, same way, Harmony Gold selling videotapes. This is how you had to do it. If it wasn't at your local video store, if you grew up in a really tiny town like I did and there was no video store, and, you know, you were renting VHS tapes at the gas station, and you wanted to see Rocky and Bullwinkle, you had to hope to come across something like this and maybe be able to pick them up. I think this is interesting. I have no idea. All it takes is a push button phone. Win $100 cash with music trivia, and boy, that dude, that's an '80s DJ if I've ever seen one. So another ad for another Starlog publication. So I wonder if Starlog was licensing this stuff and just selling it, like they just had a warehouse full of these things and they were Just pumping them out. So, all right, let's get into our good friend, K. Fabian Nicieza, as comics kayfabe would refer to him. Is an interesting article. He's talking here in the early bit about. I think it starts really interesting. I want you to put this in big black headlines. Okay, Rob Liefeld and I hate each other's guts. Then he chuckles. No, I don't hate him. No, we just started working together. Compares himself to Lee and Kirby. That's a bit of a stretch. The Lee and Kirby of the early 90s, maybe. But talking about, he's coming on to X-Force to write for Rob Liefeld. He's also writing New Warriors at this point. This art is from the annuals that ran that summer, and I cannot remember the artist's name. If you said it, I would say, yeah, that's the guy. But this also kind of gives you a sense of where the X books are at the moment. So you have sort of New Mutants and X-Force. It's just starting to happen here. Everyone's in their X-Force costumes. Feral is there, so it's got to be X-Force. New Warriors here, Silhouette, Night Thrasher, Marvel Boy. And then this is the X-Men era that we're in, so it's Madrox the Multiple Man, Legion, Siren. So Muir Island had that saga hasn't wrapped up yet. So it's interesting, an interesting time for sure. Not a whole lot in this article. He's talking about, what all he's working on, trying to pump stuff up. These New Warriors, I've got actually got some of these New Warriors issues in like some of those blind bags that you get like at discount stores, and it was interesting to reread those. They were solid. Mark Bagley art, pretty exciting at the time. This is issue 9, guest starring the Punisher, so they're pumping it up. But it was very popular and very solid, I would say. He's also writing Alpha Flight at the time. He's writing Nomad, who he describes as an MTV-style Punisher. I don't have any idea what that really means. That was a thing. In the 90s, you would have been like, oh, well, that sounds interesting. And really here talking up X-Force. I don't know why you would have needed that to talk it up. It was very popular, but he's breaking down who these characters are. And this is something that cartoonist Kayfabe has talked about. If you were reading early Youngblood issues, or even I'd say some of these X-Force issues, a lot of the back matter, the story, the plot and the character details are in interviews like this. They're not in the text. You would have to read this and then go read an issue of Youngblood or go read an issue of X-Force and go, oh yeah, boy, they really are like this. That's not what those books were designed to do. They were not built to give backstory. They were built for spectacle and to be interesting, to be fun. Now he does talk here. I think it's interesting. They're talking about changing the name from New Mutants to X-Force. He said, we had to fight to change this thing to X-Force. The editor said people think we throw out too many number ones and try to milk collectors. Accurate, but this new book is so far removed from New Mutants, we couldn't use the same title for both. That's they're backing into an excuse to launch a new number one. But it was very popular. So again, he's just given a whole rundown of characters in X-Force, talking it up. He's leaving Alpha Flight, which literally tens of people were just devastated when Alpha Flight got canceled. I've got an issue kicking around at Alpha Flight. It must be the last issue that was published, I think, before it was canceled. It's one of the worst comic books I've ever read in my entire life. I'll see if I can dig it up. It looks like it was turned out by just bullpen artists over the course of a weekend. Nice character sketch. I was really into this stuff when I saw it. for the first time, because you just didn't see sketches like this. You didn't have a sense of what the design work was like going in, and you can see that I think Rob sort of bounced between all these different designs. I don't think he ever picked one design and was like, oh, this is sort of the more standard Cable. But you would see elements of all these different designs sort of pop in. And this stuff was very, it was very exciting at the time. I don't know how else to describe it. It just had an energy. It had a sense of fun. It was, for as much grief as Rob Liefeld has gotten over the years, this stuff was incredibly different and exciting, when it first came out. So just talking up New Warriors. Interesting interview. I remembered Comic Scene as being like an interview heavy, like a comics journal sort of a publication. And it is not. It is like a People magazine. It's fairly light. There's nothing controversial. They don't editorialize. Later on, as Wizard becomes more popular, they get a little more into editorializing. But this is all just, working in comics is fun, and here are all the ideas we have, and this is going to be great. Thinking about this cover for X-Force #1, how interesting is it that you can kind of see the hierarchy of who Rob Liefeld thought was interesting. Cable, Farrell, Shatterstar, who is carrying a baguette right there. That is clearly a baguette. That is not a gun. And then, sort of Warpath Domino, the Boomer, and then this tiny little cannonball up there. This weird, background. I loved that stuff. I really did. Interesting stuff. Another Starlog ad. All right, moving on. So you would get all these kind of ads. I guarantee in every one of these publications there is a similar ad for for Comic Scene. Talking now with Jim Shooter about Dr. Solar. This is an interesting article. This is written by Patrick Daniel O'Neill. It's pretty solid. And he's talking about, this is the Valiant revival. They're trying to pump it up. Nice Barry Windsor Smith art here. It always looks good. And nice interior art as we get into it. But Dr. Solar was just not... It just wasn't very interesting. It was a Gold Key comic. There was just no energy about them. There was no one was really excited about it. So it was interesting in that they were taking these characters and sort of reimagining them. This was not in anything that you would have seen, from this era of Dr. Solar. But it's sort of the Watchmen technique, right? Where you take a group of characters who maybe people kind of remember or who have some sort of established past, and then you reimagine them and relaunch them. But there was a lot of hype. Now I do think the early issues with Barry Windsor Smith, they're solid. I mean, like looking at this page, like this blew my mind early on, and like that is, if you need an example of a Barry Windsor Smith face, I don't think you could find a better example than that. This is colored really well. Janet Jackson doing the colors here. And so Valiant definitely did bring that, I think, to the game. Like there's all these subtle gradations of color. And this is when the Valiant books were really solid, I would say. But and after Shooter leaves, I think they definitely drop off quite dramatically. So I'm looking to see was the book out at this time? I'm thinking this was getting ready to come out. So they're referencing Solar #10. They're also saying forthcoming Turok, Magnus Robot Fighter was coming out So again, some of those books I think were interesting. They weren't spectacular, but they certainly weren't worth, I think, all the hype that they got, early on. So this is specifically designed for cartoonist kayfabe. So Jim and Ed, I hope you're watching this. Champions of the Galaxy wrestling game. I always thought this was very interesting. The art alone, I think, is very interesting. But like this is specifically, I'm hoping that this exists somewhere. I need to see if I can track it down to send to Cartoonist Kayfabe, because I feel like they would just love this. Wrestling of the future is wild and more cosmic than wrestling today. Citation needed, especially when you're playing Champions of the Galaxy wrestling game. It's wrestling 100 years in the future with a whole galaxy of superstars at your fingertips. So this was 1991, so this would have been 2091. This is where we were going to be in 2091. In 71 years, we've got some progress to make to get to this point. So it looks interesting. Probably would have been a pretty fun game. It was just not where my head was at, but I would be very curious to track one down now. All right, so now we're moving into King of the Rocket Man, talking about the serials, the Old Republic movie serials with Commander Cody. God, looked great, right? Not a whole lot here, really, to say. Although Leonard Nimoy in Zombies of the Stratosphere. I mean, and Clayton Moore, who went on to be the Lone Ranger there in Radar Men from the Moon. So then we're talking about King of the Rocket Men here, which was coming out from, let's see, where was it being published? Oh, Republic Pictures Corporation, were they? Oh, Innovation was publishing this. Fully painted, looks nice. But no one was really interested in these characters. Dave Stevens was interested in these characters, and that was pretty much it. There's Leonard Nimoy talking with George Wallace, who was Commando Cody. It's an interesting it's an interesting interview. George Wallace, West Virginia boy. There you go. Whatever. Again, this is the article that you would read last when you would pick up a comic scene. You're on a car trip and you stopped at a 7-Eleven and you were able to pick up 3 comic books and a comic scene, right? And that's got to last you for a 7-hour car ride. So you were reading the Fabian Nicieza interview. You're going to read all the superhero stuff. Then you're going to circle back around and read maybe the Rocketeer interview. This is last. This is what you're getting to at the very end when there's nothing else to read. But look, he is wearing sensible slacks, which I think is a nice touch. There we go. So Bill Campbell talking about the Rocketeer. It looked good. It was very faithful to the comic. Jennifer Connelly's in it, a young Jennifer Connelly there. So that's worth the price of admission, I would say. It's set in the late 20s, early 30s. I don't know that there's ever been a comic set in that time period that's really captured anyone's imagination. Now this is interesting. This is a very short article, and probably the first place that I saw anime talked about in a publication like this, having seen probably Speed Racer and maybe some odd episodes of Robotech, but this is 91, so this is pre Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. This is pre Sailor Moon, Pokemon, all the Dragon Ball, all the series that would sort of bring anime into people's consciousness. It's before all that, and they're talking here about Streamline Pictures, which had Akira, Robot Carnival, Lensman, Carl Masick, who produced Robotech for Harmony Gold, and they're bringing over, these early works. So you could order them, direct from Streamline, or you could start to see, I would say around this time, 91, 92, it was this kind of stuff that was getting into like Suncoast Video or Camelot Music, which is where I first bought anime, was at a Camelot Music. But it was really this kind of stuff. If you wanted anything that was not Ninja Scroll or Akira or Fist of the North Star maybe, then you had to order it direct. Like when I bought the OVA of Oh My Goddess, I ordered it direct from the Right Stuff, and it was, I think, $100 for 5 20-minute videotapes. It was just a different world. I've talked to people not of my generation who just cannot conceive of consuming entertainment in this way. That's just how it was. So it's interesting article. There's not a whole lot in here. Just, if this looked interesting to you, this was probably enough to send you in the direction of your local video store to see if you could find something like this. All right, moving into Impact, the Impact Universe, Tom Lyle. This by Patrick Daniel O'Neill. They're very well written. Of the articles, I think the stronger articles here are definitely Patrick Daniel O'Neill articles. This looks like pencil art. Like looking at it now, like maybe they got it ready for camera somehow, because it's really sort of scratchy, and that cityscape is not inked clearly, which they would do quite a bit in comic scene. You would see early sort of production art before it was done. This is an interesting article. I was pretty into the Impact line. I could not find them. This would have been the era before I was going to comic shops, so I was just a victim of the tyranny of the newsstand, and it's whatever they had. So I might find a random issue here and there, but tracking them down was really pretty difficult. There were a lot of books coming out at this time. Again, they were taking the Archie heroes and Archie and MLJ comics and licensing them and publishing them through an imprint of DC. And it was really kind of aimed more at kids. Legend of the Shield, the Fly, Jaguar, and the Web. And then the Comet was part of that as well. So I wonder if Comic Scene Spectacular number 4 was maybe the first one that I bought, because I do remember reading about the Legend of the Shield. But, it's interesting. They were just throwing stuff at the wall at this point. DC, when you're, I think, that far in second place, I would, just throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks, And I think to some degree it led to some interesting ideas, Milestone, I think, kind of came out of that same idea. Vertigo, I think, came out of that same idea. There really wasn't anything to lose. Were you going to, have 6 books listed in the Entertainment This Month ad instead of 10? So some of this stuff worked, some of it didn't. This is not super interesting to me. Tom Lyle, I think the art's pretty solid, but unspectacular. Yeah, just not, talking about, the Comet, what was coming up. They were doing some crossovers and stuff. Wonder Man, here we go. Jim, Ed, this is for you. This is a character no one cared about before this book. No one cared about after this book. They're just trying to make it work. They gave him these little jetpacks so that he could channel his energy so he could fly. It was okay. It was, kind of jobber stuff, not anything real spectacular. Now, the Jeff Johnson art is fantastic. Has that sort of rounded, cartoony Art Adams style that I really have always just been a huge fan of. But, whatever. This there's just not much here. But this is this is sort of production art too. You can see sort of the marker lines here. I don't know if it comes through in camera, but on the page you can see where this was colored with markers. So this was probably the color guide for this issue, which was not out yet. This is all the same issue with the Enchantress, and this isn't colored yet. The art's really great. If you're a Jeff Johnson guy, I would go seek these issues out. They are very, very solid. Great cover, inked by Terry Austin. Yeah, I picked up a couple issues of Wonder Man. It was okay. If you're gonna read it in a car trip, yeah, why not? Now this stuff is more what I was really into, with The Fly. Another Patrick Daniel O'Neill. He must have just been making the rounds. I guess he just went to DC and just interviewed all these guys. But this is a teen superhero who has a magic amulet, who changes into the Fly, based on the Simon Kirby character. And this is drawn by Mike Parabeck, who just doesn't, to my mind, is not talked about enough as just a great artist. But I loved his stuff so much. I saw it in the Justice Society of America miniseries that came out, and it was just so good. Just blew my mind. Like, it's cartoony, but just kind of dynamic. It just looks great. I mean, it looks great at just every size. He did a lot of Batman adventures, like based on the animated show. Just such good stuff. And he died so young. If you can find any of that stuff, definitely seek it out. Not necessarily for the writing. This is pretty bog standard, superhero stuff. But yeah, for sure, get it for the art, if nothing else. It's interesting too, because they reference a female villain that was coming up in later episodes or later issues named Domino. So I don't know how they squared that with Marvel, because it was all around the same time. They might have just, I don't know, been able to get away with it. But yeah, again, pick it up for the art, not necessarily for the story. It's really solid stuff. I think the storytelling is just really solid. Good old Mike Parabeck. It's good stuff. All right, so then the Viking Prince. Couldn't care less about this. It's fully painted. That's nice. Bo Hampton painted it. If you're into that sort of thing, I guess go track it down. I don't think this probably didn't sell 10 copies, I would imagine. Yeah, I mean, okay. Moving on. So, Reed Fleming, World's Toughest Milkman. This is something the comic scene would also do, where they would have these sort of independent book spotlights. And, this was my first exposure to anything that wasn't superhero, Marvel, DC, kind of comics. And it was really interesting. You look at the art and you kind of go like, I could do that. Like, I could probably draw that. I mean, I couldn't draw that at the time, but you had the sense like, I could do that. I couldn't draw like Jim Lee. I couldn't draw like Rob Liefeld, but that felt accessible. That is definitely harder than it looks, but that is definitely a lower bar of entry. Look at Jeff Loeb hanging out there. They had the rights to this movie, evidently. So this was published through, let's take a look here. I don't remember where this was. I think he's Canadian. I think Dave Boswell's Canadian. He's talking about, what happens when your project gets optioned, and for him, nothing happened. Again, they're just saying like, well, we'll see what happens. Maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. So it's interesting because it gets into sort of, gets into where all this comes from, the background on Reed Fleming, uh, published in an alternative paper. So he was self-publishing. Okay, there we go. But this is, a 10,000 copies of Reed Fleming, World's Toughest Milkman in 1980. So it was 32 pages, 10,000 copies. Just really amazing numbers. But that was the era. You could do that. Eclipse eventually picked it up, so there's some Eclipse issues floating around out there. It's interesting stuff. It's fun. It has a sense of humor, and it was definitely interesting. And I think sort of indicative of that kind of comic. I would think Flaming Carrot sort of falls in that category to me. Sort of the heightened reality. The cartooning here I think is pretty good. The line work and stuff. Is it super? I would, if I found these in a quarter bin, absolutely, I would pick them up, very quickly, for a quarter. I wouldn't necessarily seek them out otherwise, but I think you could do far worse than that kind of stuff. It's a nice historical monument, if nothing else. And here, the interior ads. Here's all the other stuff that Starlog was publishing at the time. And I'm sure, again, like I said, if you picked up Fangoria, there was probably this exact ad, but with Comic Scene instead of Fangoria, obviously. Leaders of the Pack talking about a pilot for the Power Pack that was done in Canada. This is what we had. I read this article and I was like, oh, cool. It seemed like the sort of thing that happened before there was a TV, there was going to be a TV show about superheroes from Marvel Comics that I had heard of and that I knew, and that sounded great. This definitely never went to series, and, it was a Power Pack of all things, which, just absolutely, bounced around and nothing ever really happened with them. They'll come back, every 10 years when Marvel has to re-up the trademarks, but outside of that, there's nothing in this article. There's really nothing happening there. So pick yourself up a Walt Kelly Pogo lithograph. So this is probably the first exposure I would have had to Walt Kelly's work. So certainly when you see, when I saw Bone later on, I was like, oh, it kind of reminds me of that Walt Kelly stuff. And my dad was a big mark for Pogo, and kind of filled me in on the background there. But it is beautiful stuff. It's not reproduced really well here, but yeah, I mean, all the Walt Kelly stuff, it's a lot of sort of political and social satire of the time, especially the stuff from the 50s and into the 60s. So I don't know how well it holds up to reread that stuff now. It's gorgeous to look at. I mean, the cartooning is spectacular. It's just incredibly well drawn. So it's interesting in that respect, but is this the sort of thing that you're going to be able to read and go, oh, I can see. It's not like Peanuts where you can read it and go, oh yeah, this is still pretty funny today. I think this would end up being pretty dated if you were to go back and read that stuff. $165. Wow, that was a lot of money in 1991. And this came, the original art from the Milton Caniff collection at the Ohio State University. Is that the Billy Ireland? I'm not sure. But that's interesting. I would wonder if you'd be able to go see that original art now. since it's at the university, the Ohio State University. All right, just filling out those articles there. Continue to the back. Inside the comic book world, so you can get back issues. Interesting stuff here. You can see a Jim Lee cover for Comic Scene there. I wonder if that had to have come from somewhere else. I'm sure he didn't draw that specifically for Comic Scene. But they would have interesting stuff. Here they're talking, you can see in this a little bit, talking about Swamp Thing, The Flash, The Simpsons. But then interviews with Harvey Kurtzman, Alan Grant, P. Craig Russell. Definitely the earlier, I would say all of these up till this point, more interviews, there's more interesting information in there. From this point on, really, certainly after Wizard comes out, it is just not the case. It gets sort of thinner and thinner because I think they were losing staff and losing money. You can see their advertising just basically gets entirely pulled. It's all house ads. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely some interesting stuff if you look at these little synopsis of what is in each issue. They're talking about, let's see, just picking a random one here. Interviews with Gray Morrow, Rick Veitch, Richard Corbin, Simon and Kirby, talking about that work. Frank Miller, Chris Claremont, Omaha the Cat Dancer. So, they would definitely, dig into that stuff. I need to find issue 18. That would be an interesting one to read. Interviews with Neil Gaiman and Dave Stevens. John Wesley Shipp, who was the TV's Flash. But then Metropole, Ted McKeever's Metropole. Challengers of the Unknown, Kid Eternity. I think I might have had that issue. I need to track that down and look at it. It's funny when I read through these again. Like I say, I remember them being a lot more interesting than they were, and but it did really take me back to yeah, that's what it was like to read this stuff. And then Comic Screen, Comics Reporter. So this is talking about projects that were in development. That had some sort of comic tie that were currently in development somewhere. My the Psychic Girl. So it's interesting to see sort of where some of this stuff was that ended up, getting made eventually. And some of the stuff is just Ant-Man film, So it meant a studio had the rights to it, basically. Nothing was really happening. Bugs Bunny, so they're talking here about Tiny Toon Adventure spin-offs. Tasmania, which did happen. Elmira's Family did not. It's interesting in that respect to see what they were talking about and what, came about and what didn't. Specifically, I want to look for the Spider-Man. Yeah, here we go. Spider-Man TV pilot, New World, stage musical. That'll be interesting. And that's it. No talk about the film. It bounced around quite a bit, before it was made. So, yeah, you can see just all these things. A lot of these things just didn't happen. But and a lot of these rights would get passed around from studio to studio. And then in the back, fantasy art books, if you were into that kind of stuff. This stuff was nice. It was never my thing. It looked interesting, but I was never going to drop, however much this was. How much were these? Let's see. $20 each. Yeah, and there was no way that, plus postage. Yeah, I wasn't going to order any of these. But for people who are into this stuff, absolutely, yeah, this would have been a nice resource for it. So there we go. That's Comic Scene number 20. This was August of 1991. I think for Comic Scene as a publication, it was all downhill from here. But still, pretty interesting to go back through and look at. I've got a bunch of these to go through. Like I say, I had 23 or 25 here with some interesting stuff in it. And then I've also got, this is an interesting issue that I do want to get to. Comic Scene Spectacular, talking about Batman Returns. But all these interviews are really the interesting thing. Robert Kanigher is an asshole. We'll dig into that at some point in the future. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this. Maybe it gave you something to listen to while you're drawing. That's what I use these videos for. So if you did, I guess, I don't know, like it, comment, or whatever. And I will go through more of these soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.